Today on EcoSense for Living, we look at the future of food and open our minds to some new ways to eat, cut food waste, and save money. Is it possible to slow down climate change and feed our growing population at the same time? The book Project Drawdown gives us ideas about how to do both.
Drawdown is the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. Scientists have done an incredible job mapping out the challenge of climate change. And it can feel like a very impossible challenge to confront as the human species. Drawdown created a blueprint of possibility in the face of this seemingly impossible challenge. So the book contains the 100 most significant, substantive solutions for us to deploy over the next 30 years, technologies and practices that by and large are already in hand. They're scientifically valid, they're economically viable. We just need to put them to work.
What is the cost of eating too much protein on people and on the environment?
We take food really personally. It's cultural, there are traditions around it, and change is hard. We know how hard it is to give up sweets, for example, or to adopt new practices around eating. Once upon a time, and still in many places around the world, meat is a delicacy, it's a luxury. This shift to huge portions of steak or pork, this is a relatively recent phenomenon, and we're suffering the health effects of that.
So how much protein do we really need if you break it down a week?
So the World Health Organization tells us that the average adult needs roughly 50 grams of protein a day, and only 10 to 15% of your daily calories need to come from protein. But in the US and in Canada, the average adult is consuming over 90 grams of protein a day. So a good rule of thumb is if you eat like the average person, you could probably cut your protein consumption in half. We don't have a good sense as consumers of the actual cost of producing meat and dairy because there are huge subsidies that go to support that. The cost of buying hamburger patties at the grocery store, it doesn't account for the negative impacts. If we saw price tags on meat that more accurately reflected both the cost of producing it and the cost to the planet and to health, we would see a very different number. We think a lot about cars and electricity and buildings, but we forget how much impact we have by producing food. And when we look at livestock production, for example, around the world, it generates roughly 1/5 of our greenhouse gas emissions every year. When it comes to livestock, the biggest challenge is what are called ruminants. So cows and sheep, animals that have a unique digestive system that generates a lot of the greenhouse gas methane. And methane is about 30 times as powerful as carbon dioxide at trapping heat in the atmosphere. If cows were their own country, they would be the third largest emitter after China and the US. Similarly, if you accounted for all of the food we waste in a year and the emissions impact that has, that would be the equivalent of the third country stacked up in terms of emissions.
Do you have any idea how much food is wasted a year in the US?
The estimates are that roughly 40% of the food we produce in this country is not consumed, and it's roughly a third of food wasted around the world. In higher income countries and regions like the US, we have a tendency to waste by choice. We overserve, we overbuy, we forget about leftovers in the back of the fridge. We don't like ugly produce. Grocery stores put far more food on the shelves than could possibly be bought and consumed. We are kind of living in this ethos of abundance, which has big implications for the planet, and it also has big implications for our wallets. So every time we throw away food, we're also throwing away money. Can you imagine going to the grocery store, you've got your bags, and you drop 40% of them, almost half of them in the parking lot on your way out? I think when you imagine it in those terms, it's like, oh gosh, I would never do that. But the food comes home, we are gone more than we think we will be. We thought we were gonna host a dinner, but we didn't. And so part of it is just about rethinking how much we purchase, how often, trying to plan ahead, and then also thinking creatively when food is getting close to perhaps going bad. Do we make a soup? Do we freeze it? You know, these were actually things that were very common practices in generations before ours. And so it's kind of remembering, I think, the value of not being wasteful and using what we have. We're throwing away lots of food that is still perfectly good to eat. So this is a place where food producers could really help us by being more clear about what they are communicating. We've got best by, sell by, expiration, this sort of circus of labels that we find on our food. And most of that is not regulated. Most of that is just a food manufacturer telling you when that food is going to be at sort of optimal flavor and freshness.
You know, we always look back at our grandparents and say, you know, they were raised in the Great Depression and they saved, you know, a stick of butter went for probably a month. How do you see things from then to now?
What our work at Project Drawdown shows is that food waste is potentially the number 3 most important solution to pursue over the next 30 years. And moving to plant-rich diets, that's the number 4 solution. These solutions are as important as wind turbines and solar panels. And what's so cool is that they're things anyone can do immediately and at no cost. They're things that kids can take the lead on. They're things we can do in schools and hospitals and businesses. We really can all roll up our sleeves and have an impact on these really critical solutions.
In New Orleans, seafood is more than a popular cuisine. It's their way of life.
I'm not from New Orleans, but I developed a love of the cuisine when I moved here about 8 years ago. It's a place that, I think it's the last place in America that really has still an authentic regional food culture, which is one of the things I love about it.
Here in New Orleans, we are a food capital of the world. We get about 10 million visitors a year, and a lot of them are coming here to enjoy our culture, which is so heavily tied to our food and cuisine. And a lot of that has to do with seafood. So when we talk about sustainability and sustainable seafood at Audubon Aquarium, what we're really talking about is sustaining our wildlife and our way of life here on the Gulf Coast. Sustainability isn't just about the seafood itself. It's also about protecting the environment. It's also about making sure that we're not harming other species that interact with those fisheries.
My second daughter was born right about the same time I opened this restaurant, and it opens your eyes to needing to look farther down the road than maybe you would and into the future, and that the decisions that we make today can affect my children, my grandchildren, 50, 60 years from now.
90% of the seafood we eat in this country is imported, comes from other countries, which leaves about 10% for domestic production. And of that 10%, a fifth of that is produced here out of the Gulf of Mexico. We're the #1 producer of shrimp, blue crab, crawfish, oysters. We're tops in a lot of different types of finfish, so we have a very productive fishery.
American red snapper that comes out of the Gulf is essentially like a national treasure, is the way we kind of look at it. The same with the shrimp, the Gulf shrimp.
So with sustainable seafood, there's the aspect of it where we are taking care of something so that we can have it and consume it. But the other part of it is that we're also saving other species in that process. We have to be careful that we're just not taking too many fish out that their populations can't replenish. We've had issues with that in the past, and we've done a good job rebuilding those fisheries to the point where we don't have to worry about them as much, but we want to make sure that we don't go backwards.
The worst case scenario, if we're not paying attention to sustainability like we need to be, is that the great fish of the world are gone, not available to us, and everybody's eating farm-raised tilapia, which is, not exactly ideal. Farm-raised can be great. There are amazing farm-raised fish out there, but a lot of the farm-raised fish that's sold in this country basically swims in its own feces because it's packed so tightly into these fish farms. Now, there are responsible, sustainable fish farms that do things properly, but they're kind of few and far between at this point.
Choosing a local or domestic seafood choice is going to do a lot for the environment because you're buying seafood that is from a well-managed fishery. It has great science behind it, and you know that it's going to help a local community, and it's a U.S. product. Buying local, aside from helping your local community, it also reduces that carbon footprint.
It takes a lot less gasoline and whatnot to drive a truck from 10 miles down the road, 50 miles down the road, than it does to ship something from South America, Mexico, California. I care about local. It's partly selfish and it's partly philanthropic. Selfish because I want my food to taste really good, and the less time anything spends in transit, the better it's going to taste.
We operate a restaurant partnership program here in New Orleans where we work with close to 30 restaurants, and part of our work with them is we actually put on a sustainable seafood dinner series every year that we call the Summer of Sustainability.
Tonight I'm making a redfish, and I'm doing it on the half shell.
A blue crab bisque with a little coconut milk, ginger, lemongrass, and charred corn.
Brined and smoked Louisiana Gulf shrimp with a summer succotash and an avocado aioli.
And it's really a great way for us to engage with our chefs and bring in groups of people to really learn about sustainability and sustainable seafood in a great setting here at Audubon Aquarium.
We actually serve the guests in the big tank room, which is pretty exciting. We're serving our signature item, which is Oysters Good Enough, which is Gulf oyster on cream leeks with bacon and béarnaise sauce. And, it's a really fun thing, get together a group of chefs every year. It also helps get the message out to other chefs and spread the word of what we're doing.
We work as closely as we can with fishermen, with institutes like Audubon Gulf to make sure that when we bring something to the plate, we are making smart choices.
There are a lot of fish in the Gulf of Mexico that I think, and a lot of chefs here in town think, are stunningly good. The Spanish mackerel in the Gulf. I've heard rumors that there is skate in the Gulf, but there's no market for it. So fishermen don't fish it. They pull the fish out of the water, whether they're dead or clinging to life or still alive, they throw them back. It starts at the chef and the seafood market level. If they don't really know what to do with the fish, if it's not one of these common kind of name brand fish that you see on restaurant menus, they're not going to serve it. So one thing that we're trying to do is develop markets for some of these products that right now maybe people don't want.
The food is amazing, and if you want to be able to enjoy it in the long term, you have to think in terms of the future, and so to make wise choices when you're dining.
When I look at what we have been gifted with, and that's the seas, the oceans, if we don't conserve, if we don't appreciate what we've been given, there won't be anything left.
Here in New Orleans, food is celebrity. And we have these great chefs, these great celebrity chefs and resources, and people listen to them and they trust them. We can do edible education. We can teach people how to save species just by, having a great meal.
I would say most people come for the delicious cuisine. There is a rock star lineup of chefs tonight. I do think they will walk away with more knowledge about sustainability, but they're definitely here because their tongues told them to come.
One thing people can do, consumers can do to educate themselves is just buy American seafood. Generally in this country, we are quite good at sustainably managing our fisheries. So, buy American shrimp, redfish. Anything you can that's American, odds are good, is going to be raised in a more sustainable method. Farm-raised catfish from the Mississippi Delta, which is where my wife's family's from, is sustainable.
We tell them that it's really easy, that all you have to do is go and ask for local, ask for domestic, and that's gonna be your safest choice. You wanna eat things that are local within your region, that are seasonal, things that are natural. Then we even have our own little seafood guide app that people can download that has what's in season, what to look for, a couple quick, easy questions to ask.
Yes, we should serve people, but we should also be of service to people. And I think, we do a lot. The chefs in New Orleans, I think, are very philanthropic and give a lot of their time and energy to the community because we really believe in it, and the community does nurture us. So, we try to nurture it in return. It's the right thing to do. I believe there's right and there's wrong. Okay, do the right thing. It's pretty simple and cut and dry to me.
I think when it comes to the environment, every choice you make really actually has a meaningful impact. It might be a ripple, but it can continue out. So don't ever feel like this small little thing is too small, it's not worth your time, because it does have meaning, it does have impact. And if everybody does a little thing, we're all doing a lot of things.
We grow up learning to eat certain foods, but what if bugs were on the menu?
A lot of people ask, why eat insects? And I very much like something that other people who have been asked this question have done, which is to say, why not eat bugs? In 2011, the United Nations FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, delivered a paper. It's about a 100-page paper, basically advocating the practice of insect eating for everybody, not just the developing world, as a good environmental thing and a good nutritional thing to do. How are y'all doing today? Welcome to Bug Apetit. Is this your first visit here?
Yeah.
Have you eaten insects before? Oh, you're in luck. I mean, New Orleans is the best place to eat anything and everything, right? We eat crustaceans like they're going out of style. Everybody loves crabs and shrimp and crawfish and lobster, provided you're not allergic to them. These are basically just bugs that live in the water. They are nutritious. And if you fix them right, they are delicious.
Would you like to try chocolate chip cookie with a roasted cricket? Come on over here. Give it a try. He knows. Oh, yeah. Delicious. All right.
There are some serious researchers in laboratories who have done assays of the nutritional content of many different kinds of insects. And across the board, insects have high amounts of iron, phosphorus, calcium, niacin, riboflavin, thiamine, all things that we need. The insect that I know the most about nutritionally is the cricket. We have looked at these insects per 100 grams, and in the case of house crickets, which we serve a lot here at the Audubon Butterfly Garden and Insectarium, you've got about 12 grams of protein, about 5 grams of carbohydrate, and I think 5 grams of fat. And nutritionally, that's a very good balance. You might say, for all this time, we haven't been eating bugs, so why begin with it now? Well, first of all, historically, there are many, many cultures around the world that have eaten bugs. But let's stick with the United States, because that's probably what's meant when most people ask that question. And the fact of the matter is that we worry a lot these days about the environment, and there's no reason not to do some things, or a lot of things, that are better for the planet. And in this particular case, you've got a hyper-abundant food source, easy to farm, very efficient at converting the plant matter that it eats to the meat that we then eat from it. And so if you look at things like land use, it's a lot better to try to get 100 pounds of cricket on the table than 100 pounds of beef. So the nice thing about having insects as an alternate protein source is that you end up potentially using a lot less farmable land. And by the way, the same holds for water as well. Insects in general have much lower requirement of volume of water per critter than things like large livestock.
It was good. This was real good. You gotta try it. Actually, I'm gonna try another ones. Let me try another one of them cinnamon ones.
Is this your first visit here? Yeah. Lots of people ask what bugs taste like. And the standard answer you hear is that most insects are kind of nutty in flavor. Now, that's difficult because, as you and I know, a pecan doesn't taste like an almond, and an almond doesn't taste like a macadamia nut, and so on and so forth. So I would suggest, if you're really curious about what a bug tastes like, you try it. If you decide you want to eat insects, there are a couple of ways you can go about doing things in terms of acquisition. There are places that farm insects, mostly for the zoo industry and the pet trade. These are insects you can buy and fix in your kitchen too, but recently there have been some startup companies that are raising insects specifically for human consumption. The alternative to that is to forage. You can go out on your own and look for insects. Now, I would recommend looking for insects that are outside of an urban area so they don't have various pollutants on the outside of their body that you would have to worry about washing off. The common insects that are served here are waxworms, which are a type of caterpillar, mealworms, which is a type of beetle larva, and house crickets. House crickets taste a lot like sunflower seeds, especially after you roast them. Waxworms are interesting because you can poach them or boil them and they remain soft. And, you know, they kind of pop when you chew them. It's a gushy food. But you can also fry them, in which case they're crunchy. They're kind of fatty and kind of buttery. As for mealworms, this is going to sound strange. I am allergic to mealworms. So I don't have a good description of what they taste like. As for the more exotic ones, I like to fry my dragonflies, and when that happens, they taste a lot like soft-shell crabs.
It's your lucky day. We don't serve dragonflies all the time here because we have to go out and catch them ourselves. These are nice and warm. They just came out of some oil. I fried them lightly, and they have a little bit of Dijon soy butter on top. And I put it on top of a little mushroom. And I'll tell you more about that after you let these folks know what you think of it.
I wouldn't have even known it.
Yeah. Every time you eat a bug, if you make it a regular practice, you're helping out a little bit.
I ate a bug.
Ate a bug, yeah.
I ate a bug. Yes, I did. I'm so happy about this. It's so cool. Did not expect this coming down here today, but I'm glad I did.
Making small changes to the way we eat can have a big impact on our planet, and it's something we can all start doing right now.
I think food gives us an incredible opportunity to be more connected to the living systems of this planet, right? It's something that we're doing multiple times a day and really connecting with air, with water, with sunshine, with soil. And it gives us a chance to reflect on that interconnectedness that we have with this planet. There are now lots of cities that have made commitments to reducing food waste. It's part of the Sustainable Development Goals to cut food waste by 50%. We're seeing that this is a huge opportunity to both address problems of food security and hunger, which is still a condition of life for 800 million people around the planet. The very best thing for us to do is to stop food waste before it happens, or then perhaps to divert food to people who need it and wouldn't otherwise have it. So we see lots of great work being done by food banks and food pantries and those sorts of efforts. There are opportunities to take potentially wasted food and send it instead to feed animals. There are also lots of entrepreneurs working in the food waste space. So there's an incredible volume of bread waste. Well, now there's a company making beer with that. There are companies that saw the opportunity of produce that was too ugly to put on a shelf at a grocery store. Well, that's perfect for smoothies or soups or juices. And so there's lots of innovation happening around the opportunity of food waste.
Okay, let's talk about composting.
If we get all the way to the point of needing to dispose of food or dispose of food scraps, compost is a great way forward. So if food waste ends up in a landfill, it generates methane, this potent greenhouse gas, because it's decomposing without oxygen. Compost, on the other hand, takes food waste and recaptures the value that's in it to end up with a really, really rich amendment for soil. Compost is like bringing black gold back to a garden or to a farmer's field. On the policy front, places like France and Italy, now if you are a grocery store, you can't throw away food. It has got to end up either in the hands of people who need it, or perhaps on a pig farm, or at the very least in a compost pile. And that's an area where lawmakers have a real opportunity to help lead the way.
Do you think the U.S. will ever put something into place like that?
We're starting to see some cool initiatives in cities. You know, cities pick up our garbage, many of them pick up our recycling. They can also pick up compost. So we see that, for example, working really, really well in San Francisco, where you have a compost bin, a recycling bin, and then actually a much smaller trash bin. And when you make composting that simple and that easy, it becomes hard not to do. It's not just about cities doing the right thing, it's often about cities saving money. It costs money to send garbage to the landfill. If you're taking food waste and food scraps and composting that instead, you're actually creating something of value that then can come back into the system, as opposed to value that's literally just being thrown away.